Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Rhody Family Matters. And today, our special guest is Amber Champlin from PSN. She is the educational specialist. And of course, I'm sitting here right next to my partner who'll be sharing this time with us, and we'll be asking several questions about what it means to be an educational specialist. I'm going to pass this on to you. You can introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, Tyrone, for opening our third podcast around family matters. Welcome once again, and thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this incredible and educational podcast. We are super beyond excited to be interviewing today Amber, who is our behavioral educational specialist slash manager who oversees all of the educational concerns, calls, crises that come to our statewide form, one line, or families that come and to walk in, really struggling with education. And as we know, education is a big part of our system of care. So with that being said, we are super excited again that we are interviewing Miss Amber. I'm going to turn it over to her so she can share a little bit more about herself. And then we're going to get into some specific questions that families have really requested that we ask Amber.
Thank you so much, Brenda and Tyrone. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with everyone today. I am, as you said, the educational specialist here. I'm also a mom of 4 children, all with varying special needs, and 2 foster daughters who also had special needs growing up. This is something that is super close to my heart. And I think the more we can learn to work together with our school districts, the more powerful we can become and the more powerful our children can become. And I think learning to advocate in a restorative way is the most effective way to get the education for our children that they're entitled to.
I have to stop you for a second because you're saying loving in a restorable way. You
Yes.
don't hear that very often. Do you want to explain a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So most of the families that we work with at PSN, and honestly, with the housing market the way it is, most of the families in Rhode Island are going to be essentially in the homes that they're in now. They don't have the funds to pay for private schools. We have wonderful private schools in Rhode Island, but often they cost more than a bachelor's degree for 1 year. So the reality is, if your children go to the school in the district that you live in, that's where they're going to be going to school for the entirety of their school career. So, or if you have a child that's maybe a little older that has a special need, that you're just starting that process, but they have siblings that are coming up behind them. The point of restorative advocacy is to learn to work collaboratively with the schools. The school is not the enemy. They are coming at this from a different perspective. And honestly, the more perspectives we have, the more information we can get. So if we can help our parents and our families work with the schools and take what the school says not as an accusation or as a reason to feel bad for, that their children are struggling, but more as a way to get more information and to work together to create a plan that will allow their children to be successful and access their education.
Developing a partnership.
Absolutely.
Amber, I think and thank you for answering that, our question in such a beautiful way. I think it is so important, that it's so important that parents really embrace this approach that you are providing us with, because education advocacy, especially when it comes to our own children, and it hits home with, especially a child that has behaviors or that has a special learning style, it can become very stressful. It can affect us in so many ways. It can affect even us as parents, our own mental well-being. Sometimes we're unaware of how angry we can come across, or how we can come across in a way that is almost very inappropriate towards, the school personnel or the leadership behind that makes the decisions for, the children that get services and special education and all of that. So it is so important, that you started with really asking parents to advocate in a proactive way.
Absolutely. And nobody's perfect, right? We're going to have times where we, for lack of a better way of putting it, kind of lose it, right? And we're getting emotional and we respond in a higher, heightened manner, right? And that can happen. And that can happen to parents and it happens to staff as well, because teachers and principals and directors can also get very frustrated if you're not looking at things in a collaborative way, right? So we all want to be heard, but sometimes when we're working so hard to be heard, we forget to listen to what's being said, right? So if we can learn to take a step back, and one of the most important things as an advocate that I like to tell families is you can pause a meeting. 100%. If you're getting frustrated, ask to take a break. There is nothing wrong with saying, hey, this is a little intense for me. I really appreciate it if we could take a couple of minutes so I can just reset. And I can guarantee if you're frustrated as a parent, the staff at the school is probably frustrated as well and would love to take that break as well, right? There's nothing wrong with that.
And I think one part, I mean, for, many of the families, including myself, that I have worked with and that have had to attend an IEP meeting, an educational meeting alone, we don't know that we are welcome also to take a family member, a friend, a colleague.
Absolutely.
A lot of families don't realize that.
It's really, really important to bring somebody with you, right? Just to have somebody there, right? It's an important high intensity environment, right? There's a lot at stake. It's your child's education. It's your child's future, right? So of course, as a parent, you are emotionally invested and you can be the most calm, rational human being on the planet. That doesn't mean that you couldn't use the support and somebody to say, hey, you might be getting a little stressed.
Exactly.
Right? So bringing someone, whether it's a professional, your spouse, your sister, your brother, your friend, even bringing a child's therapist if they're available is an option.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that, because I remember that I would, attend an IEP meeting, never realizing that I could bring someone. And I think it's so important. So we're going to get into a few quick key questions that we want to just kind of have you answer, that I know a lot of families have questions around. And one is, what qualifies for supports at school?
So when you look at a child's needs, there are multiple avenues to get support. The first avenue that is accessible to all students is something called MTSS, which is multi-tiered systems of support. Okay, so there are 3 tiers to that. So tier 1 is for all students in all classrooms in all districts, right?
Okay.
Everybody has access to that. And it's just the teacher in the classroom saying, oh, hey, I might want to check on that kiddo a little bit more frequently. Okay. That's what tier 1 is. Tier 2 is, hey, we're noticing that this kiddo is struggling, but he's doing really well in everything else. So it's just maybe math, and maybe in math, it's just fractions. He did great with decimals, but fractions we're struggling with.
Right.
So we're going to target a little bit more support, maybe pull him into a small group within the classroom, or take him out of the classroom in a small group for about 6 weeks and just see if just doing a little bit of targeted short-term support can get them back up to where the classes are, right? And then tier 3 is when they're really noticing, hey, we've done tier 1, we've done tier 2. He really does need targeted one-on-one support for the next few weeks, and see if that helps. That's the first step. Usually if a child has hit tier 3 and they're not making progress, or they're making minimal progress, that's when a school or a family can call and say, hey, maybe we should do some evaluations to see if he needs some special education services. So that's when we look at the IEP process, right? There's an IEP, which is specialized instruction. And then there's a 504, which is just accommodations.
So what is
right?
an IEP?
An IEP is an individualized education plan. A 504 is a civil rights anti-discrimination, right? It's basically allowing a child to have the same access to their education as another student. So you think a child in a wheelchair has access to an elevator, whereas other students would use the stairs, right? But we want to make sure that that child in the wheelchair has the same access to, say, the art classroom that's in the bottom floor or the second floor as other students. So the difference between an IEP or an individualized education plan and a 504 is one thing. It is, each of them is a child with a disability that impacts their life or impacts their education. That's a 504. Stop it there, right? Child with a disability and it impacts their education. Mm-hmm. With an IEP, it's a child with a disability that impacts their education and they require specialized instruction, meaning the way that they need to be taught something is different than the way other students would learn that same material. That is the fundamental difference between an IEP and a 504.
Okay, thank you so much for clarifying that point so clear. Does a student have to be failing to qualify for an IEP or a 504?
Absolutely not. You can have a high honor student that is passing all of their classes and they could still qualify for an IEP. And that's because there's multiple categories for an IEP, right? So you could have a high honor student that has significant anxiety. Mm-hmm. They don't need academic support, but they need support around coping strategies, around executive functioning skills, right? So managing their time, being able to de-escalate and relax if they're having a panic attack, being able to talk to somebody about what is stressing them out and how they can manage it better. Those are what we call a functional IEP. Okay. And that's for kiddos that have ADHD, that have anxiety, that have depression. Is it impacting their education? And when we say that, it's not just their academics. It's their full educational opportunity, which means if they are not able to understand and relate to their peers, right? If they're having conflicts because they can't take somebody's perspective, right? And they don't understand, and maybe everybody's out to get them. Well, that's what they're perceiving. So now they're struggling.
So that kind of leads me to my next question. It has to do with SEL, which I believe is social emotional learning.
Absolutely.
So can you discuss a little bit more about social emotional learning and the impact that it has with students with mental health challenges?
Absolutely. So one of the things that I found with social emotional learning, it goes hand in hand with, believe it or not, a speech and language evaluation, right? A lot of people don't recognize that. You think, especially with high school kids, they're talking. Maybe they're talking in text form, but they're definitely talking. Yes. And we're not worried about their articulation, right? They can pronounce words. But part of speech and language is also pragmatics, which is the nonverbal learning skills. It's the reading body language. It's perception. It's, how am I able to read your tone, your facial expression? Am I able to understand if you're being sarcastic? Am I able to take your perspective on something? So that ties in so closely with our kiddos that have these mental health and behavioral health challenges. If you look at a child with anxiety, there's a high probability that their mindset is everybody's out to get me, right? Are they able to understand that if a teacher is correcting them, it's not because they want them to fail, but instead it's because they're trying to help them be successful.
If you're going, is that also would fall with students who are on an autistic scale? Or?
Yes, that can frequently, and it's not all or nothing, right? You can have a student that has the physical skills of pragmatics, right? You can have a child with autism that has those skills. You often can see a child with autism that doesn't have those skills. You can see a child with ADHD or major depressive disorder, PTSD, right? Reactive attachment disorder. These kiddos, sometimes they have the skills, but we have to remember when we're doing evaluations, an observation is key, right? So you can do the test and we're one-on-one. I'm one-on-one right now talking with the two of you. There's no distractions. There's nobody else in the room. There's no conflict for me. It is on paper or in a video, I am watching a conflict, right? I am not in the middle of it. So I'm not in a heightened state, which means I could tell you, hey, if I'm at my friend's house and I accidentally break their vase, what should I do? Now, if I'm actually at a friend's house and I have severe anxiety or I have ADHD and I break a vase, am I really going to do, or am I capable of doing what I know I should do? Right? So that's why it's so important to do the evaluation piece where it's the testing, but also an observation.
Oh, beautiful.
Because then we can really get a comprehensive view of what these kiddos' needs are and how we can best support them. And that can either be through accommodations in a 504 plan or through specialized instruction in an IEP.
Beautiful.
How long, Amber, does the accommodations under either the IEP or the 504, is there like a timeline where it expires that they would need to revisit and renew and add any?
So really with a 504 plan, it should be reviewed every year. So there is, and it's not so much the child can be removed from a 504 plan. I mean, they can, but really it's more if the child doesn't need it anymore, right? So a 504 plan falls under general education, right? It's just access to accommodations. So it's more making teachers, general education teachers, aware that, hey, I have a kiddo here that has ADHD, and maybe they're going to have some fidgets that they want to play with. They focus better with that. Or maybe they need like one of those resistance bands, which goes across the bottom of the chair so they can push their feet against it. Or maybe they need to get up and move around a little bit, and that's okay. When it comes to that, they just review that 504 every year. And it's key. It's key to review before transitions. So if we're transitioning from elementary school to middle school, right? Those accommodations are going to look different, right? Because now we have one teacher in elementary school, but we might have, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, we might have multiple teachers. Each district is different.
Okay.
But when they do that transition, it's really important to know what's going to change, right? We might need to leave class a couple minutes early before the bell so we have time to get to the next class, right? That's not going to be an accommodation we use in elementary school. So key transition times are a good time to review a 504. That being said, an IEP and a 504 can be looked at any time. We want to review once a year. That does not mean that you can't call a meeting whenever you want. If you have a question, if you don't think things are going right, call a meeting anytime. Put it in writing, right? You want to make sure you have everything documented because our teachers, our staff, they're human, right? So I could be talking to you and then get distracted and forget that you just said, hey, can I have a meeting? That's human. That's human nature. So put it in writing. Send it to the people that you know that you talk to frequently about your child and make sure it's an email is fine. I'd like to schedule a meeting.
So what you're also saying is that a parent should not totally be dependent on the school to make all these determinations.
Absolutely not. A parent is an equal member of the team. There are team decisions. A parent should always, always be included in a meeting. One of the regulations in the special education law, and I'm not an attorney, but I do know them very, very well. It says that parent participation, right? And meaningful participation, meaning if you know you're a mom or a dad or a guardian and you work Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, let the school know, hey, I'm going to need some time to schedule a day off. Or can we have the meeting at, say, 7:30? Most school staff are there, right? So it needs to be scheduled at a mutually convenient time because we want our parents involved in their child's education.
Very much so.
And furthermore, have your kiddo come, right? It's their life. It's their education. After age 14, especially for an IEP or a 504 as well, after 14, they should be involved. They should be invited, and they will be invited by the school. But even before that, all of my kids, from the time they could walk and talk, they were part of their meetings. Whether it was, I'm going to draw a picture of how my perfect classroom would look, or I'm going to give you a list of things that I want. And some of those things are, you got a 6-year-old, I want candy all day, right? I'm going to tell you, I need to move around a lot. My legs get tired of sitting.
That's so true. So Amber, we know, especially after COVID and, children returning back to school, with the whole truancy numbers just really being outrageously out of control. Do truancy, do students that are involved in truancy, would they be qualifying for supports and services? Do they qualify?
There's
Or is
no
that
way
set?
there's no way to guarantee that a child qualifies without doing evaluations, right? Now, if a child has a documented diagnosis, so if you had an outside evaluation done, a neuropsych or observations and rating scales or whatever was done by your child's pediatrician or psychologist, and they have said your child is diagnosed with anxiety or ADHD, and they put that in writing, you could then go to the school and say, well, we need a 504 plan at the least, right? But also an IEP, we should evaluate, right? We should definitely evaluate. And those evaluations for a kiddo that is in truancy and is not going to school, they don't have to be done in school. They can be done at the library, at the administration building. If a child's not going to school, there's a reason. And
Right.
our job as parents and schools is to find out that reason, because our kids are entitled to an education, however that education may look. And it is so crucial that we work together to make sure that that happens for our kids.
I love that. Amber, thank you so much. You have answered so many important questions that I think linger in a lot of our families from day to day. We here at Parent Support Network appreciate the work that you do, see how extremely busy you are going out into the communities. We know that you serve a statewide population, that they have to call and request Amber, and Amber will do, the screening to be able to support the family and really, evaluate if she is able to go to the meetings. How many meetings do you average in a year, Amber? Just before our closing,
Ooh, that's a good question.
I just want that to kind of send a
So
message out.
I would say easily over 100, probably closer to 2. There may be one week that I have 15 meetings. It's very quiet in the summertime, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
But it gets very, very busy during the school year because there's a lot of kiddos with a lot of needs.
Yeah.
And we need to really work hard on making sure that those needs are met.
That is a high, high number. And again, thank you so much for putting your heart out there and really supporting, our population, children's behavioral health, and doing it with such a humble, happy, joyful heart.
Always joyful.
But also with that, the knowledge that you bring, Amber. And I know that we're moving into a model where you'll be going out more in the summer and really, educating groups of our agency partners to really give them the basics where, a lot of our community healthcare workers and peer recovery specialists and anybody doing direct work with the population that we serve, parents of children with who have emotional and or behavioral mental health challenge, having the basic tools to be able to move forward with some of the educational needs that their child needs. So
Absolutely. I think in closing, I think the one thing I would say to any parent or any partner agency that's going to these meetings, if you hear something and it doesn't sound right, ask a question. It probably isn't right. And it doesn't mean that anybody's doing it badly. It just means it doesn't sit well with you. So listen to your gut, listen to your instincts, and ask those questions.
We so appreciate it. I'm much more educated about the process. And I think perhaps it's something that every parent should know.
Absolutely.
You never know what's going to be going on with your child and the support that you need. So we really appreciate it. And I hopefully feel that you're going to be speaking to many, many parents out there who listen to this podcast.
Oh, I hope so. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Amber, on behalf of the Rhode Island families that you serve and continue to serve, and just for sharing, your time with us today. We appreciate your knowledge. So again, we may have to have you back for a second conversation.
I would love that.
Okay, Tyron.
Yes.
So I'm going to turn it back over to you. We learn every time we have these podcasts.
It's so we get to share this. We have these wonderful, very educated, and some of them are just lived experience educated individuals come to share their voices with us. Thank you for listening, and this ends another episode of Rhody Family Matters. Thank you.